I would be thrilled to have a part in raising the conversational bar a little bit. This program you're doing, if I'm involved with it, I hope it's an opportunity to make it a little easier for people who've seen things or who just have a natural curiosity about the phenomenon to talk about it openly. And for somebody like Dennis Kucinich, poor Dennis Kucinich, to be able to mention publicly that he saw something in the sky, and for the sky not to suddenly fall down all around him for having said that. Most of the people who know me either share my interest in this or are accepting of my interest in this. Certainly all of them are aware of it. The only time I get into trouble is when one of these people I know will say in front of someone I don't know, by the way, Tim's interested in UFOs. I may say nothing. I may laugh it off. Although sometimes when they start talking about little green men, I might get confrontational, and I always regret it afterward. I have read enough now and talked to enough people about their personal experiences to be convinced beyond the shadow of a doubt that something is happening. Quite apart from what the mainstream media and the politicians and the military spokespeople might say or not say, and quite apart from the dog-eat-dog infighting among ufologists, there is the phenomenon itself. I mean, my God, the likelihood that our planet is being visited by intelligent life forms from another solar system or dimension or timeline really doesn't get any better than that, does it? I've never seen anything unusual in the sky. I've never experienced any missing time. I've never seen anything in my peripheral vision that I couldn't account for. None of these things, ever. Not once. I tell you this, though, I'd give my left nut for a verifiable sighting. Of course, I'd want to get that frozen somehow in case what I saw turned out to be a weather balloon or whatever, you know. How did I come to be interested in ufology? Well, I'm sure that began as an interest in science fiction, pretty typical of my demographic. But it was entertainment for me for the longest time. It wasn't something that I studied. In 1996, I was working as a general assignments reporter at the state newspaper in Columbia, South Carolina. The State was the big news daily, and still is in South Carolina. We got a press release from an organization, it might have been South Carolina MUFON, I'm not sure, saying that they were going to be holding a UFO conference in Columbia. And that was pretty unusual. In fact, it was unprecedented, and I got my editor, my news editor, to pay the $100 conference fee that they were charging. They wouldn't issue us a press pass, which was kind of unusual too. So I attended the conference, and I met and interviewed the headline speaker, a man named Bud Hopkins. I think I might have heard of Bud, but certainly wasn't familiar with his books. And I went back to the newsroom and I wrote an article, straight piece, tongue-in-cheek. Typical mainstream media treatment of UFOs. Why did I do that? Well, that's how it was done. That was, and I think to this day still is, to a great extent, the culture of newsrooms as pertains to UFOs. You don't take it seriously. Nevertheless, meeting Bud Hopkins, I won't say it was an epiphany, but it was certainly a wake-up call. Bud Hopkins was the first person I'd ever met who was as invested as he was in the phenomenon. And he was completely invested. It had become his life's work at that point. And just as importantly, for the impression that he made on me, he was absolutely real. He was just telling the truth as he knew it. And over time, not a lot of time, I began to do my own homework. I looked for authoritative sources. One of the good things about working in a newsroom is that you get to go to the arts and entertainment editor and ask him to hand you all the UFO books that come in from publishers for review. So late 90s, early 2000s, I was reading and writing about a lot of what was coming out. At about that same time, the internet was coming into its own as a research tool, and I used it to research UFOs. That's how I found Bud Hopkins again. He had a group in New York called the Intruders Foundation. At the end of the evening, Bud asked me if I had anywhere to stay for the night, and I told him that I was planning on getting on the subway and going back out of town to try to find a cheap room. And he said, well, why don't you just stay here tonight? And so I spent the night downstairs in a ceramics studio. And the next morning, Bud and Stanton Friedman and I went down the block for bagels and coffee. There's an awful lot of noise surrounding the signal, and you've got to develop an ability to tune out what's not important. If meeting Bud Hopkins in Columbia in '96 was my wake-up call, then I guess the 2005 X Conference was my shower and getting dressed for work. Cumulatively, the X Conferences exposed me to any number of people, all of whom I would call normal and credible. It was at that first one that I attended what Steve Bassett, the conference organizer, calls the pilots panel, which is just what it sounds like, 4 or 5 pilots sitting behind a table facing an audience. And these aren't light aircraft pilots. These are commercial jet airliner pilots and military pilots. That first panel, one military pilot, he was retired, talking about their UFO experiences. I'm watching, for example, Monsignor Corrado Balducci from the Vatican talk about the likely reality of UFOs. Jaime Maussan, the Mexican Dan Rather, if you will, he's got a 60 Minutes type program there, talking about how very well documented the UFO phenomenon is in Mexico. And don't let me forget to mention that I designed the 2009 X Conference t-shirt sweatshirt. And scientists and retired government officials and retired military officials and on and on. And they've got nothing to gain by this and often an awful lot to lose. Why would they be doing this in front of hundreds of people and the media? And people like Gary Tuchman from CNN would cover it smirkingly, like I wrote that article in '96. What's up with that? I do think that the mainstream media yearns for credibility, and that's understandable. And I also think that the UFO topic looks to them like a credibility disaster waiting to happen, and I get that too. Still, isn't it interesting that People's Daily in China, the official news organ of the Communist Party in China, deals with the UFO phenomenon like straight news, actually investigates reports of UFO sightings. And their articles about these sightings, and there are many, don't include the obligatory naysayer for balance. I found out about People's Daily in the course of doing research for a UFO column that I wrote for Technorati.com. The name of that column was Pimp My Reality. I know it sounds like I was trying to make fun of it. I wasn't. I was just trying to be commercial, get the page hits, justify the existence of the column. And I can say with confidence that People's Daily is among the international news media, the mainstream international news media, one of, if not the premier news sources for UFOs. Believe it or not. Which is not to say that governments and military and media in other countries are as standoffish about this as we are in the United States. In the United States, it's like we've got this dome of denial protecting us. In France, they released the Cometa report. In the UK, the Ministry of Defense is releasing their files. They actually had a UFO desk manned by a guy named Nick Pope, who's now a frequent speaker on the UFO circuit. In South America, several countries, both the military and the government, are very open about their interest in the UFO phenomenon. In the United States, by and large, consumers of mainstream media, and I guess that's still where most of us get most of our information, and the internet is included in that category, hear from the to get Orwellian about it, the Ministry of Truth, that there's nothing here, folks, move along, and I hate that. And that's why this program that you're doing and programs like this are so interesting to me. Oh, and yeah, it would be great to be on a television show too.